Now, before I start, I'm going to tell you that my remarks are going to embarrass both Secretary Rumsfeld and my father, but I'm going to do it anyways because they're both very humble and wonderful people who don't like nice things said about them, but I'm going to do it anyways. Now, throughout my life, I've been quite fortunate to have two very important and influential male role models in my life. I stress male role models there because I don't want to get in trouble later with my mother if she sees this, or with my mother-in-law, who's actually going to be joining us shortly for the afternoon, so I want to make sure I have her covered too. And of course, if we're talking role models, the ultimate role model that should be being discussed at a Rumsfeld Foundation event is the incredibly wise and amazing Joyce Rumsfeld, but we can save that for another time. But back to those two influential male role models in my life. As you may have guessed, those two men are both with us here today, and they are none other than Donald Rumsfeld and Douglas Conant. This morning and throughout the day's sessions, we are discussing and reflecting on leadership and having the opportunity to learn from the examples of experienced leaders from a variety of sectors. And in terms of leaders to learn from, although I am admittedly biased, I would submit that Don Rumsfeld and Doug Conant are two of the very best there are. There's a great deal that could be said about the leadership and management experience of each, and for a thorough review of that, I'll make a shameless plug and recommend that you read the terrific books that each of them have written. However, putting aside the extensive experience of both of these leaders throughout their lifetimes, there are two significant qualities that I've been fortunate to observe in both of them that I would like to make note of, because I think they shed lights on ways in which they both approach life and leadership that we can all learn from. The first is that they never stop learning. Even after all they have accomplished and all of the experiences they have had, they approach life and people with a curiosity and with an interest to be admired. A refrain often said by Don Rumsfeld when talking to people asking for advice on their careers is that he has found that he is always happiest when he is learning. So throughout his life, he has made a point to make sure that he has been in positions and around people where he has felt like he was learning from both the work that he was doing and the people that he was surrounded by. In Rumsfeld's rules, one insight included comes from Dr. Robert Goldwyn and reads, "You can learn something from everyone, from a 5-year-old to a head of state. Listening is important." Doug Conant, in his bio, specifically includes that his career has been defined by a commitment to studying, practicing, improving, and teaching the tenets of leadership that works. And as Doug provides advice and guidance to groups, when he speaks to them and mentors, he often champions the concept of being a student of leadership and the importance of continuing to learn and study to be an increasingly effective leader. So number one, Rumsfeld and Conant approach life with curiosity, with interest, and with a desire to keep learning. The second quality that I would like to recognize is that both of these individuals, after all they have done, continue to give back and support, mentor, and encourage others. Having worked for Mr. Rumsfeld now for more than 9 years, I have witnessed his consistent willingness to meet and provide advice to countless individuals, from young people just starting out and looking for their first job, to experienced public servants who are looking to make a career change. No matter the person or their level, he is generous with his time and with his counsel. And of course, the tremendous impact he has made in many lives through his establishment and leadership of the Rumsfeld Foundation must also be mentioned in this setting here today. We are all here today because when he left his second tour as Secretary of Defense in 2006, rather than just retiring and taking a much-deserved respite, he wanted to create a foundation that would support and encourage future generations of leaders and promote the important principles of public service and free systems. And more than a decade later, all of you and the important contributions you are making to our nation and to our communities are the proof of the value of that decision and of that investment. Turning to Doug, after retiring from Campbell Soup Company in 2011, he founded Conant Leadership, a mission-driven community of leaders and learners who are championing leadership that works in the 21st century. He lends his time to numerous nonprofit organizations in both formal and informal capacities. His company, Conant Leadership, distributes philanthropic donations as a key element of their activities. And similarly to Mr. Rumsfeld, I've also witnessed his willingness to mentor and assist countless individuals over the years. Of note, a simple yet effective attitude that he encourages others to approach their leadership roles with is the notion of how can I help? And as I've seen time and time again, he brings this how can I help approach to his personal and professional interactions daily, to the benefit and appreciation of all of those around him. In essence, both of these men continue to pay it forward and continue to make important and meaningful contributions for our greater society in their everyday lives. And in so doing, they are certainly an inspiration to me, as well as to all those who have the valuable opportunity to learn from them. On that note, and so we can move on to having a chance to learn from our next speaker, you can read his full bio in your conference folder, but here are some highlights. Doug Conant is an internationally renowned business leader, New York Times bestselling author, keynote speaker, and social media influencer with over 45 years of leadership experience at world-class companies. He previously served as CEO of Campbell Soup Company for a decade, as president of the Nabisco Foods Company, and as chairman of Avon Products. Currently, he's the founder of Conant Leadership, chairman of the Kellogg Executive Leadership Institute, chairman of the Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy, and chairman of the Higher Ambition Leadership Institute in Boston. And while I suppose all of that is quite impressive, I would personally argue that his most important role to date has been as my father. In all honesty, I could go on and on about how wonderful he is, how much I respect him, how much he has taught me, and how much he is truly just an incredible, thoughtful, and brilliant human being. But I will spare you from my excessive praise and instead conclude his introduction by saying this. The term is often thrown around describing someone as their father's daughter, and I'm very proud to say that I am indeed my father's daughter, and I would consider it a great honor to be described as such. Dad, you're up.
Wow, my gosh. She read it just the way I wrote it. Isn't that great? One mistake, though, you put Rumsfeld before Conant. I guess you have to do that because he's paying the bills now. It's great to be here. Gosh, I feel a little underdressed, but I'll get over it. You guys look great. Jeez, I had all these. Riding the Acela train down here from Philadelphia, I had this chance to make notes and all the things I wanted to share with you. And then I heard General Myers speak, and I'm going to change everything up. But make sure my phone's off first. Okay. I got new hearing aids the other day. You can't tell. Can you see? You can't even see them, can you? But I have an app on my phone, and I have Bluetooth, so the phone will ring even if I have it on silent. It'll ring, and it'll start ringing in my head, and you won't hear it. You won't hear it. So I'm paying more attention to my phone than ever before. I'm in the first 30 days of this new habit, and it's an adventure. It's an adventure. Anyway, it's so great to be here. Sarah, thank you. Thank you for those remarks. I won't say much about Sarah, but she has been a shining light in our family's life. And I remember when she was saying, Dad, I think I'd like to go back after my internship and work for Secretary Rumsfeld. And I said, are you sure you want to? You saw what he's like. Are you sure you want to do that? And she said, yeah, I think I do. I think I can handle it. So later on, I think that week, I got a call from Secretary Rumsfeld saying, I think she wants to come back. Do you think she can handle it? And I said, she can handle, and he'll tell you this is true. I said, she can handle anything you throw at her. And he can throw a lot at somebody, as General Myers will attest. And so then Sarah goes to work, and he says, Sarah, your father told me to throw everything at you and see how you do. Well, all I can say is she's still there 9 years later, and she weathered the storm. She rose to the challenge, and I'm very proud of you, Sarah. What I I have so much to talk about and so little time, and I really want to be engaged here as opposed to just a talking head. So I'm going to sort of fly around a little bit. I will do a little background because I think in all your work in academia, you've always got to consider the source. Where is this data coming from? Where's this perspective coming from? So I do indeed have a lot of corporate experience. I started my career at General Mills at the bottom of, I went to Northwestern, Kellogg. It wasn't Kellogg then. It was the Northwestern Graduate School of Management. And straight through, and then I went to work at General Mills at the entry level, and I worked there for 10 years. Then I went on, I was fired there. That's another story. And then I went on to work at Kraft in Chicago for 7 or 8 years. And I went from there, I was recruited right after Barbarians at the Gate. Some of you would remember this, by KKR to go in and rebuild RJR Nabisco. And so I was working on the food side, not the tobacco side. And I did that for about a decade, the last 5 years of which I was president of Nabisco Foods. We turned that, and I wrapped up that engagement December 30th, 2000. And a week later, I started as CEO of Campbell Soup Company, and I was there from 2001, January 8th, 2001 through 2011. I retired from that job, and under the advice of my doctors, I had to take a year off. We may get into that later. And then I went on to become chairman of Avon Products, which was in desperate shape, still is. It was just in the news in this past week. And I did that for 3 years. We resolved the financial difficulties, but didn't really fix the problem. And all along, since I've retired, I've been doing Conant leadership. So I have a history of working in large institutions, for-profit institutions, and that informs most of what I'm going to be talking about. They are filled with good people who, in their own way, are mission-driven, are trying to take care of their families. They're your mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers. They're not the dark side. They're well-intentioned people trying to serve their families and their communities every day. They're the people that General Myers was trying to protect all this time, serve and protect. At the same time, I've been on the edge of your world too. I'm not totally a heathen. I haven't been, I've touched the nonprofit arena. I was chairman of the conference board for several years, and we did all the economic forecasting for the G8 countries, and we're involved in a lot of things globally. I was chairman of the Grocery Manufacturers Association here in Washington for several years as we were advocating with Congress to make sure the consumer products industry was represented properly on the Hill. As Sarah mentioned, I'm chairman of the Committee Encouraging Corporate Philanthropy, which is a fascinating organization, which was founded by Paul Newman and David Rockefeller, and a few other, John Whitehead, who you know, and other New York luminaries. Paul, when he started Newman's Own, he couldn't believe how much money he made working for Newman, and he gave it all away, but so he got some of the luminaries in the New York area together. He was living in Connecticut and said, you guys are making too much money. You have to give more back. Let's create an organization that advocates more societal engagement, both with philanthropy and in other ways. Let's create a movement around giving more back to, doing well and doing good. I've been associated with that group now for almost a decade, and it's a CEO organization. We have almost 250 of the Fortune 500 CEOs as members, and we are championing doing well by doing good and making and encouraging these CEOs to be a force for good in society. And this is not a hard sell. They all want to do this. They all have children and mothers and fathers who they want to represent with distinction and with honor. And so we're doing that work too, and we were involved, I was involved with the Obama White House on some of that work. I'm also on the board of the Partnership for Public Service. We have actually an intern from the partnership right over there with Kathleen Hare, which I just discovered, and I'm going over there right after this meeting. I worked there with Sean O'Keefe and a couple other characters So I do that. I also am on the National Organization of Disabilities and involved with that organization with Tom Ridge. And we actually have a meeting next week down here on that. So it's not like I'm just languishing over here in the corporate world. I've got my foot in the nonprofit world. And the partnership, we actually do work with, we do a lot of leadership training with the SES through the partnership, and I've been involved in that now for 5 or 6 years. So that's the source. I teach leadership also at Kellogg. My wife and I founded the Kellogg Executive Leadership Institute there at Northwestern. I teach up in Boston at the Higher Ambition Leadership Institute, which is a nonprofit, and I volunteer my time there. And the notion there is creating great leaders who build economic and social value. And the synergy in there is magnificent, and we have lots of wonderful stories to talk about. And then I run my own boot camp in my spare time. We do that quarterly for 24 applicants. And we scholarship in a number of nonprofit people as well. So that's the source you're getting all this mumbo jumbo from. I have, do you remember who the first leader you ever thought about was in your life? I'll tell you mine. It was Ernie Banks, Chicago Cubs. He was the shortstop for the Chicago Cubs. On Channel 9, they used to have Home Run Derby. And I'd go home after school. You know, I was quite small. I'd go home after school and watch Ernie Banks on Home Run Derby. He was my guy. As a young man, sports heroes were the guys, and he was the leader of the team. And then we also had Chicago Bears tickets, so I would go to the Bears games, and Gale Sayers and Dick Butkus were my guys when I was growing up. And if you grew up in Illinois, the first public leader you learned about in the land of Lincoln was Abraham Lincoln. And we heard about Abraham Lincoln in grade school, and then in Cub Scouts. We went down the Lincoln Trail, I think down to Springfield, Don, I don't know. Anyway, there was a Lincoln Trail there, and I became fascinated with him. I went on to Northwestern and became fascinated with American presidents and studied them all, and majored in political science. Then I went in to get my business degree, and I was fascinated by business leaders, and I started studying business leaders. And what fascinated me was they were all different. There wasn't one script, you know? And you read all these books about the people that study leadership. They provide enormous value. They help you think through your leadership. But Pavarotti had a great quote. He said about music, but the same thing applies to leadership. He said, learning music by reading is like learning lovemaking by mail. You know, you sort of have to get in the arena and start doing it, and roll up your sleeves and get to work with your leadership journey. And you know what? What I love about this group, what I love about you guys, is you have this aspiration to make a contribution that transcends the ordinary in your work. It shows up in your bios. Each one of you wants to transcend the ordinary. And I'm telling you, you're well on your way. You've got the capacity to provide the thought leadership. But that's going to hold you back if you just stay there. It's leveraging the thought leadership with the leadership of others in a way that moves the entire enterprise forward, which is where you really get the mojo and have the full impact of your contribution profile. You know, it's not about you. It's about them and bringing them along in a pretty compelling way. This is all off script, but we'll get to some of the script. But, you know, I have this core business. You have to be incredible. This is about performance. This is a performance art, leadership. But you perform through people and with people, not by yourself. And, you know, my observation is the best leaders, all these leaders I've studied, are they have high standards. They are tough-minded on standards, right? High standards. But I'm finding that in today's climate, and we'll talk about how this climate has changed, they also have to be, at the same time, tender-hearted with people. I grew up in an era where, look, are you tough or are you nice? And the answer was, well, I'm a little of both. And I felt sort of, how do you make that work? Well, I always had high standards for performance as a competitive athlete and with others, but I also cared about them. And I found as we were leading in the 21st century, where we had 6 different generations at work, and you sort of had it was more challenging. They just didn't do what you told them. I had evidence that I genuinely cared about them. Tough-minded on standards and tender-hearted with people. I found, it's just my point of view, that I couldn't really expect them to care about the agenda day in, day out, if they didn't feel the enterprise cared about them. It just started to fall apart in the private sector. And I'm finding it's falling apart in the nonprofit sector. I'm also finding it's falling apart in civil service. If people don't feel the enterprise cares about them, it's hard for them to embrace the enterprise agenda. If you're leading a part of the enterprise, you need to have the high standards. You also need to evidence that you care about these people enough so that when they are representing you, and by the way, out of the 1,000 decisions that are made in your group, I don't care how big it is, 900 of them are made when you're not in the room. And by the time you hear about them, they will have been reimagined so they make perfect sense. All right? They'll be reimagined. They'll make perfect sense. Even if they don't, they'll make perfect sense. These people have to represent you on demand, under pressure. They have to have your back, and you're not there. Can you have confidence that they're going to represent you in a way that is done with distinction and meeting the needs of the enterprise? Not if they don't think you care about them. And I'm not saying this is all let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but there has to be a level of compassion shown. I don't think you have a choice. Let's talk a little bit about the situation we're in. And 21st century has changed pretty dramatically. I've written on this. I have probably 6 points that I want to touch on. And the first thing is that institutional leadership in the last 20 years has changed in terms of magnitude and dynamism at an unprecedented rate. Information technology is flying around, right? I go talk at companies a lot, and and you say, well, how many of you, how many emails do you get in a day? How many emails? Hundreds. They get hundreds of emails in a day. And I say, well, how do you deal with all that? And I say, is that all? Oh, no, we get text messages too. If we haven't responded to the email, they text us. And besides, it's the only way my kids will talk to me. Right? It's the only, Sarah, if I didn't have text with her, I'd lose her. I already had to give her up to her husband, and now I just have a group text. So you have email, you have text messages, right? And then you say, well, do you get any phone calls? How do you get your... Oh, yeah, we get phone calls all the time. Okay, emails, text messages. Well, do you have to meet with... Do you talk to people? I mean, in person? Oh, yeah, we have meetings all the time. And then you say, well, when you're on your way to lunch, do you have a little private time? Do you have time to reflect? He was saying, you have time to get to the 30,000 feet? And they say, well, no, because usually there's somebody standing outside my office who I haven't responded to their email, the text, or the phone call, and I didn't go to the meeting, and they're saying, I've been trying to talk to you about this. Do you have a few minutes over lunch? And then I say, well, do you have any, what about the rest of your life? Do you have any family emergencies? Oh, yeah, about once a month. Johnny's not doing well. One of us has to go pick him up at school. Or my mother's not well, or my brother or my sister. And these people feel as if they're getting a sip of water from the fire hydrant of life. And you feel that, and you feel that way too. All of you do, I guarantee it. We're just better at hiding it and managing our way through it and sorting through all this. People without your capacity are overwhelmed. And I would argue probably below the surface you are too, in terms of making the right decisions on demand all the time. That's what's happening in our society, which is totally, I was dealing with carbon paper when I started. You remember carbon paper, Don? And to see how this is morphed and how it's changing the way we work is profound. That's just the beginning. We have diversity in the workplace like never before, thankfully. Thankfully. I think there's power in it, but it can be incredibly disruptive and dysfunctional too. We have 6 different generations in the workplace. When I started, we had the traditionals who had come back from World War II and the baby boomers coming in. They were all white men, and we had hierarchies, and decisions were made. And we had time to make decisions. You would write a memo. It would go up to the Pope, and then you would wait for the white smoke to come out, and you would find out the decision was made after you'd probably rewritten the memo 3 or 4 times. That was 2 generations, white men, hierarchy. Today we have 6 generations, all motivated, all with a desire to serve, all with noble intent. I believe that. But it's introducing a level of complexity to the workplace with different life agendas, different questions. And they're also being asked to deal with on-demand decision-making now, right? Because of the information. The information comes in, the customer needs to know what's your response. They have to make that response on demand, representing your enterprise, like that. So you have 6 generations. You also have half the workforce is women now, which is great. And we're finding our way to getting the right representation at the right levels. It's taking too long. But I'm optimistic we're going to get there and get there, I think, faster than anybody thinks. When I started in my life, work, I was working at General Mills, and how we dealt with Minnesota had to be managed very carefully relative to how we dealt with Wisconsin. Now we're dealing with a globe. When I was CEO of Campbell, we had operations in 38 countries. We marketed in 120 countries. And so we've got all this information flying around, all these generations at work, all this diversity, and this huge footprint now. And we're trying to steward our brand and our company through all that in a very competitive marketplace. On top of all this, as people are feeling more overwhelmed in their work, they're expecting more from society and more from the government. Societal expectations have gone up. And if there's a misstep in the corporate side, there's this, we've got to fix that. Mark Cuban and the Dallas Mavericks this week, we're not dealing with that properly. Les Moonves at CBS, we're not dealing with that properly. People ought to be accountable. We ought to regulate somehow. Every day, more regulation, higher expectations. Citizens feel overwhelmed. We need help. Government, help us. That's the world that all of our institutions are in. For-profit, not-for-profit, civil service. In the midst of all this, competition has become more intense. You're competing on a global footprint. You've got people scrambling to outperform you on all dimensions. And performance expectations in the private sector are actually higher because we have all this information and all this technology. You're supposed to do more for less. That was my sense with the military budget. You know, we've got all this technology. We should be able to protect our company better for less money. It's a challenging environment. In that environment, traditional hierarchies are breaking down, and processes. They're breaking down in the face of all of this churn. Stress levels are high. If you track stress in the workplace, well, you guys know it. I see a knowing look or two here. Stress levels are high and getting higher in the face of all this because we all want to serve and perform. But it seems so hard. And we all feel as if we're victims of this world as the fire hydrant moves on. Stress levels are high and getting higher, and trust levels are low and getting lower. although encouraging to me, trust in the private sector has now started going up again, because I suspect trust in the government has diminished, and trust in the nonprofit community, there's well-intended people there, and I'm deeply involved in it, but we have no resources, and it's hard, and it's fragmented, and it's hard to get things done. So that's the situation. Fun. A friend from Harvard, I don't think he coined it, but this is, I heard from my friend Bill George at Harvard Business School. He called it the VUCA world. You know VUCA? V-U-C-A? Oh, good. Fresh meat. This is something worth looking up. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And volatile, fast change with no clear pattern. So things are going faster, and we look for patterns, and it's hard to find them. It's discontinuous change. Uncertain. There are frequent disruptive changes. And the past is no longer predictive of the future, because the patterns aren't there. So the model for the past, or when you did the war plans, for what are these assumptions for the past, it's not prologue anymore. It's got to be rethought on demand by 6 different generations under more stress with lower trust. Other than that, it's easy. Complex. You have multiple interdependent causes going on. So you have these siloed activities going on of great scale, and they're moving around in different discontinuous ways, and you're trying to manage all this complexity. Difficult. And then you have ambiguous. And he defined it ambiguous as little clarity about what is real and what is true. I go to the supermarket all the time. I have fun with my wife on this. And I come back from the supermarket, which I love to, having worked in the food industry for a long time, I actually have fun going in this. I've worked in about every aisle of the supermarket. And I love reading the tabloids as I'm checking out, and I'll come back and I'll tell her, did you know about Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie? They're getting back together, or whatever the headline says, which is totally not true. And I'll come back and tell her as if it is true. And she says, do you believe everything you read? And obviously I don't. But it's hard to tell what's truth and what's fiction here, you know. My wife's traveling this week, and she texted me and said, did you know John Dingell had a heart attack? And, you know, I have to go check to make sure he's all right. John is married to one of my wife's, a sister of one of my wife's good friends. So a VUCA world is what we're dealing with in a nutshell. And then we talk about, well, how do we navigate all this? And the key question I asked myself as I was coming here on the Acela was, how does one lead in a manner that delivers a quality contribution in an enduring way in a VUCA world? Right? Not easy. Well, so I go back to my perspective. I have 2 answers to that question. And they all start with, what do you control? And where do you have influence? And what I would contend, and Stephen Covey who was one of my mentors, had a great way to talk about what you control. And he would talk about, he'd say, between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in that space, you have the power of choice. You can choose to respond however you wish. In fact, he would say you have the responsibility to make that choice every day. Between the stimulus and the response, you have a choice. Many of us feel as if we're victims, or most people feel as if they're victims of this fire hydrant phenomena, but we're making choices, and we have to own those choices. We have to own them. And believe me, we can do better than we're doing. So I think the first thing you do is say, what do I have control over? Well, I have control over my choices. And I'm telling you, you can make a choice to expand your leadership capacity. You're doing it with your thought leadership, and that'll carry you a long way, but it's not enough. I think General Myers was talking about how, it's through people that you will have your impact realized. It's not just that you're the smartest person in the room. How are you going to influence others? To do that, you have to have your rudder in the water first. If you don't have your rudder in the water when you go into these environments, they'll eat you alive. You'll be lost at sea. Just the way he felt when he had do we close that first question you had when you became the commander. Work is a pretty unforgiving place now. And I would argue that he was a student of leadership long before he got to that position. He was making his notes, this guy's good, this guy's not. I would also, I would have loved to ask the question, maybe we'll get into it, is I guarantee you his life growing up influenced the leader he became. He's carrying life lessons with him from his family, from his grandparents, from some mentors, and they run wide and deep, and they probably guided him more so than just the notes from those leaders. All the leaders I know are incredibly well-grounded and have harvested life lessons from their early life. And we actually do that at Conant Leadership Boot Camp. I would sell it to you, but I don't have room. So the question is, how do you expand your leadership capacity? And then the second question is, how do you better engage your colleagues and associates to have greater impact? So it's about you and it's about them. And my answer would be that you have to become an even better and more intentional leader. If you were to take one word away, I would say, or two words, more intentional. You're very intentional with your career choice, your course of study. I would say today you need to start being more intentional. How do I want to harvest my leadership development? How do I want to put myself in a position when the time is right so I show up and I'm pretty well anchored, so I'm not looking to somebody saying, well, what do I say next? I mean, it won't be perfect and it will be messy, but you can do better than, I guarantee you can do better than you're doing today. And I would challenge you to do that. You need to become a more intentional leader. My next book, with God willing, I'll have the manuscript done by April. I can't tell you, I've got to be careful. If I told you all of it, I'd have to kill you. But the notion is, for leaders, they all feel stuck. How can I get unstuck? I'm stuck. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. And the question we try and ask is, how can I get unstuck, change my leadership life, and maximize my impact in a way that works for me? If it doesn't work for you, you won't be able to sustain it. That's the question we try and answer. And there's a process in the book. You'll have to, in fact, we'll make it available to all, whenever. Next year, we'll make it available to this group. Well, you don't have to take it, but we'll make it available to you. And we challenge people to think about their boldest dream for their leadership journey. What's my boldest dream? What do I want to do? And as you think about that, you're going to realize, well, I have to be competent, but at my work, whatever your field of study is, but I also have to be competent working with others, right? Because ultimately they have to trust me. I would build on what General Myers said. Competence is a cornerstone of trust. The other piece, which he also talked about, was character. It's when you know what you're doing and you do what you say you're going to do, you build trust. And that's something you ought to be thinking about, trust building every day of the week. I know what I'm doing, and I'm a person of my word, and I'm going to do it. And if I'm not going to get it done, I'm going to make sure the people around me understand that. But what is the boldest dream for your leadership contribution profile? And I talk contribution profile, not success. But it could be viewed the same thing. Then I encourage people to reflect on where they've been and what are the life lessons that have really guided them to where they are today, that have influenced you to be these wonderfully aspirational people who want to change the world. What's driving that? How can you harvest those learnings and put them to work for yourself? Then I encourage people to go outside the four walls of their experience and actually study the world around them. the leaders that they've worked for, I've had 28 bosses, not counting my wife or my daughter. You think I'm kidding. But 3 were really good. 3 were really good. 10 were solid. 15 were not particularly helpful for me. But they were good for other people, so it's a relative thing. There are people I just don't work well for, and there are people I do. And so it was important for me to study these leaders and the characteristics of these leaders and try and find what worked for me. Out of the vision, the reflection, and the study, we suggest people actually develop a perspective and a plan. How can I do this? How do I want to walk in the world as a leader? The one thing you know is it'll be wrong. Guaranteed. So you start, and then you learn, and you make it better. This is all very much, if you study Kaizen, this is Kaizen 101. It's all small steps in an intentional way, in a guided direction, and then making continuous improvement. Then we encourage people to put the plan to action. Plans are great, but they sit on the shelf. How do you bring it to life in your everyday work? And then the last piece is you improve. So there is a way to do it. I'm going to share with you, I'm going to fly through this. I'm going to share with you, I have my own. If you go to my website at conantleadership.com, incidentally, I'm not paid at conantleadership.com. We run it just like Newman's Own, actually. All the profits are given away. We pay our associates and our rent, and everything else is given away. So when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm not selling you anything. My purpose, as I've reflected on it, is to help build high-trust, high-performance teams that defy the critics and thrive in the face of adversity. So I've always been like a moth to a flame, wanting to go to Barbarians at the Gate and KKR and Campbell when everybody that I worked with said you shouldn't go there. I was always intrigued by that and thought we could find a way to make a difference. It was also one of my leadership heroes is Teddy Roosevelt, and that famous quote about it's not the critic who counts. That language found its way into my leadership purpose. And then I have some core beliefs as I've reflected and watched leaders in the past. I think it's all about people and performance, and you can't perform without the people, so they're inextricably linked. I challenge myself every day to embrace the genius of the and, reject the tyranny of the or. I bring an abundance mentality to my work that says, you know, there's got to be a way to make this all work. If not, so be it, but I'm going to give a little time to figuring out how can we get sales and earnings up. In a corporate culture, they'll say, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to get the earnings up, or do you want us to sell more product? What's the answer? Both. Do you want us to get our costs down, or do you want our employees to be happy? What's the answer? Both. You know, if you want to perform in today's world, you've got to do more than just either or. You've got to do both and. In terms of my belief, I believe you have to win in the workplace before you can win in the marketplace. I think our military does a great job of creating a workplace that can win, that's winning, and it can always be better. I think our federal government isn't doing enough to help us win in the workplace. We're going to be here next week celebrating federal employees with the Sammy Awards. And we've got some amazing people in there, but they're lost in the sauce at this point in time. I think you have to first value the individual if you want the individual to value what you're doing. And I think you have to be, in today's world, you've got to be incredibly tough-minded on standards and tender-hearted with people. I'll give you a quick story, and then we're going to get into some discussion here. When I went to Campbell, we were headquartered in the poorest, most dangerous city in the United States, 75,000 people, 70 murders a year. Bankrupt. The prior 3 mayors were in jail. Part of the reason we were bankrupt. And we were trying to decide, do we stay there or not? We had a leadership team that was depleted. We had had several rounds of layoffs. We had lost half our market value in 1 year. And as a leader going into a new situation, how much time do you think you have in the private sector to get it right? You have 3 years, and most of your jobs too, actually. You have 3 years. The first year, it's the other guy's fault. I'm doing the best I can. The second year, it's our fault. We're learning. The third year, it's your fault. You better own it. And so I'm there. I don't know my ass from my elbow. Don't cover your ears. I don't know my ass from my elbow as a CEO, just sort of like you felt when you were that first-time commander. I had been president of a company, but I hadn't dealt with Wall Street and all of that, and not extensively as the point person. And what am I going to do? And the people we had running the company were not good enough. We were real clear about what our standards were, and they were high. And we said, we're going to work with you this year and help you get through it, and I hope you can reach the standards. If you can't, we're going to have a different conversation. And over the course of the next 2.5 years, we turned over 300 of the top 350 leaders in that company. 6 out of 7. I believe it's the largest change process of a Fortune 500 company. It's certainly the largest one I've ever heard of. So, but we had standards to meet, and that top 350, there were 19,650 people working for them who were counting on them. There were investors who were counting on them. We had to make tough calls. We did it in as compassionate a way as we could. We gave them time to get on the bus or not. We had a little time. We gave it to them. We were very clear about it. Out of the 350, we promoted 150 within, but we had to go out and hire 150 crackerjack leaders too. But we had to be tough on standards. At the same time, we had to let everybody in the environment know we cared about them. We were making deposits in the emotional bank account of that organization daily. I have a practice of writing thank you notes, which if you get into following us, you'll find that was a big deal. I would write 10 to 20 handwritten notes a day that would be delivered the next day to people who were performing well, not happy birthday. I see you delivered this project on time, under budget. Good job. I see you surpassed your quota this quarter. Good job. And I was 10 to 20 a day, 6 days a week, 10 years. We were investing in supporting what was working while we were dealing with what wasn't working. We were doing both, tough-minded and tender-hearted. As we went through the purge process, our employee engagement scores went from being the worst in the Fortune 500 to the best in the Fortune 500 over a decade. There's a measure of engaged to unengaged. And it's a useful measure because it's probably the only, it's the best metric for culture building. How do you measure culture? And we had 2 people engaged for every 1 person who wasn't at first, which was the worst in the Fortune 500. And and we ended up at 17 to 1, 17 people engaged for every 1 person who wasn't, 10 years later. 12 to 1 is world-class according to Gallup. Think of a 13-person work group. If you've got 12 people doing the work, it doesn't matter what the 13th person's doing. You're going to get the job done. So we were building employee engagement while we were making tough decisions. It turned out everybody knew those leaders had to go, and it was just a question of, was I going to last long enough to make the decisions to do it? Of the top 350 who could have felt like deer in the headlights when we made all those changes, 7 years later, after all that, so the die was cast, they were part of the program, the employee engagement score was 77 to 1. 77 engaged for every 1 person who was disengaged. We measured it every year. That's the highest that Gallup's ever tracked in any organization, in any country of any scale. I would have liked to have known who the 4 people were that were not engaged, but it really didn't matter. And I'm sure they didn't last long. We also went from being a poor performer to being one of the best performers in the world in our sector. And we also became recognized through, which we won't talk about, as being really socially responsible. And we were one of the top 10 companies in U.S. corporations' reputations in the United States, as measured by the Reputation Institute. We got into the top 10 for the last 5 years. And that legacy continued until this year, where we were number 1 and I've been gone 7 years. So we were winning in the workplace, we were winning with the community, we were making the tough decisions we had to make, and we lifted the company up to good performance. Now that's a great story. 7 years later, that company is being attacked by activists for not hitting its numbers for 18 months. So, you're only as good as your last annual report. But it can be done. And as a leader, you have to be looking at the variables that are important to you and figuring out, how am I going to lead that way? I could go on forever, but I need you to, I'm going to get you engaged in a different way now. I want you to think about someone who had a profound influence on you. It's probably not a boss, unless it's Don Rumsfeld's era. He's had an influence on you. He's probably not a boss, but it could be a teacher, a coach, a mentor, who said just the right thing in just the right way to you. I'm stalling now because you're going to actually have to talk about that with the person sitting next to you in about 30 seconds. So really think, because you've got to show up. And then I'm going to ask you to share that story with the person next to you. What I'm betting is you're going to be picking someone who had very high standards for you, but they also cared about you, right? I'm guessing. I'm leading the witness here. We don't have much time. But I think you're going to find that you can be tough-minded and caring and hold someone to high standards and move things forward. Okay, now turn to the person next to you, or if there are three of you, because we have an awkward number, take 1 minute each. 1 minute, share your story, and then we'll flip it around. Okay. Okay. You guys are good. Usually I lose the group for about 5 minutes when I do that exercise. I can't get control. But you guys are good. You have good discipline. You take direction well. I love the conversation about discipline earlier. The best-selling business leadership book of all time was written by Jim Collins out of Stanford. And it's good to great. I don't know if you've read it, but it's worth reading. And he's very aligned with General Myers as the two differentiating characteristics for a great leader. At a level 5 leader are humility and fierce resolve. You never assume you know it all. You've got to learn, you've got to be listening, and then you've got to have a resolve to take the hill. And you've got to take the hill. But at any rate, I'm distracting myself here. I would suspect that as you had these conversations, these people you talked about had a profound influence on you. You carry that lesson with you today. It is in your DNA, I suspect, in some way, shape, or form. And the lesson is in the DNA, and it was delivered by someone that you held in high regard, that honored you and trusted you. And what I'm saying, when we're going to get into, we could get into a lot more on leadership. But at a minimum, what I would suggest is you just need to be more like that person with the people with whom you live and work. You know what it looks like. You've experienced it. You've had moments of great clarity on your journey where somebody has showed up for you and wants to help you and has the competence and the character to do so. And you've been able to carry it with you, and it's in your DNA now. And you have the opportunity to leverage this great expertise you're cultivating in your chosen field and bring it over to the field of, integrate it with the emotional competence you need to engage others in a more productive way. You just need to be more like those people with the people with whom you live and work. You can do this. In fact, shame on you if you don't. The world needs enlightened leadership. The world needs people who have taken a nanosecond to think about it and to try and get better at it. And if not you, who? If not you, who? I'll close with, there are 10 two-letter words. I wish I had thought of this. This is from a sales meeting, but that somebody ran, and I was in the audience. Most of my life I spent sitting in seats out there, not up here. And he closed with 10 two-letter words, and that really were the essence of his message. And he had 5 blanks, and then 5 blanks below, 2 letters, and we were all trying to figure out what it was. Have any of you seen this? No? Oh, good. And the 10 two-letter words were, if it is to be, it is up to me. You need to take personal ownership of your journey in your chosen field and in the field of leading and influencing others. And you need to do that starting now, because you need to be ready when you have the opportunity to lead, to show up in a distinctive, honorable way that delivers high performance. And you can do it. If anybody can do it, you can do it. So that's what I wish for you. That's what I encourage you to do. I suppose we have time for some conversation, but then I could be the only thing standing between you and lunch. So, and I'm also can be. We don't have to. I mean, I'm you wore me out. But oh, I have one last story. I'm gonna. I'll talk to you at lunch. All right. I have one last story. It's a very poignant story. July 2nd, 2009, my daughter and my wife were down here, right down the block. This is what I thought of it when I walked over here from the Ritz-Carlton, at the M Apartments, right? I think. July 2nd, 2009, Sarah was moving here to start work at the Rumsfeld Foundation that day. It was a Friday. I was in the back of a car on the New Jersey Turnpike. You don't want to be on the New Jersey Turnpike before 4th of July weekend on a Friday afternoon. It's like Indy 500 time. And I was asleep in the back seat at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and my driver ran into the back of a stopped dump truck going about 80 miles an hour. We were going 80. The dump truck was stopped at exit 6 on the turnpike, which has since been fixed. And my driver escaped miraculously. The airbag deployed. He was fine. He moved the car so that his side wasn't hit very hard. But it was a split moment thing. I was not so fortunate. And I was rushed. They had to cut me out of the car, and I was on my way home to fly to pick them up to go to our summer home for the 4th of July weekend and get together with our family. And I was rushed to the Audrey Fold Medical Center in Trenton. I had 10 broken ribs, a broken clavicle, a broken sternum, and I had life-threatening internal injuries, which were the real concern. My colon had been severed, my intestines had been severed. There was a real risk of infection. And I had my seatbelt on, but it shredded my torso. It's sort of shredded. I'm living proof that you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. As long as I keep my shirt on and this is why I wear the suspenders. You would never know. It's hard to keep the pants up, though. That's why these are here. But they called my wife and Sarah, and they said, you need to get up here right away. We're not quite sure how he's going to do. And so my wife came up to the Audrey Fold Center, and Sarah drove up. I don't know when. I was out of it. I had 18 hours of surgery there. I'd never been in a hospital other than the birth of our children. And a slight exaggeration. And so all of a sudden, I'm in the ER, I'm in the ICU. I'm waking up after about 20 hours now of surgery. Tubes coming out of me everywhere, not knowing what happened. Fortunately, I was asleep when we had the accident. And my wife is there holding my hand. She had gotten to the hospital, and she held my hand in ICU, and she wanted to make sure she was there for me when I woke up. She didn't want me to wake up in some strange place wondering what in the world's going on. She had sat there for hours waiting for me to wake up. without a bio break. She was just not going to leave. She's an amazing woman. She was not going to leave. And when I woke up, she had my hand, and I looked at her, and she said, "I'm here. I'm right here." And basically, what I want you to do as you go off on your leadership journey is to be able to say that to your colleagues. I'm here. I'm right here. To say that to your loved ones. I'm here. I'm right here. How can I help? Being fully present and being available to these people to get the job done, to perform, is mission critical. It's differentiating. Not enough people are doing it. You can do it. Go forth and prosper. Thank you very much. I'm done.